Right, hi there. This is just a quick video to show you how to use the SCM Render Farm. So what we're going to do today is this will be a video going through a simple job submission, assuming that your scene or your animation isn't too resource hungry. I'll create a second video for slightly more complex job submissions, but make sure you watch this one first because this will cover all the basics. The more complicated one will just talk about some advanced settings in the Cube GUI. So it's a 5-step process. First step is we need to figure out if our job is actually a low resource job or not. So the easiest way to do that is to open up Maya. So this is the scene I'm using. It's a teapot. It's a scene we use with the second year's visual effects one. And I know that this is actually quite a light scene. As you can see, there's not much in there. It's just a teapot, a ground plane, and some image-based lighting. That's about it. So I'll do my render settings first. So render settings, and the only things I really need to worry about at the moment are getting my scene name correct and the image format correct. Obviously, you'll need to set your settings as you want them, the quality, the the scene, all these things. But the render farm won't let you define or rather, it won't let you give you use these wildcards, use these keywords. So if you want to use keywords in your file name, in this case, mine will be it'll create a directory called scene based on the scene name, and then all the images will be called camera_render layer, so that I can easily sort out my final shots. If you're using OpenEXR format, which hopefully you are, we can't define that from the render farm either. So make sure that's set in your scene as it probably should be. So what I'm going to do is just do a quick test render. So I don't need to do 110 frames. I'll do just 2. And I'll leave everything else. Batch render it. And the only reason I'm doing this is just to figure out how much RAM, how much memory my scene needs to render. So if I open up the task manager, what we should have, if we scroll down, we should have got a new process. I presume you all know how to use the task manager, just we've got applications, processes. And this one here is the process that's doing the rendering at the moment. As you can see, it's 82 megabytes. But we haven't actually started rendering yet. I think it's just saving the scene at the moment. Right, it started increasing now, so you can see it's up to 260, 300. And all we've got to do is just keep an eye on this and see how much memory we're using. So now you can see down here it started actually rendering the scene, and it got up there to 600 meg. 650 meg. I'll just pause the video while it renders. Right, that's finished rendering. You can see the process has now disappeared, and down here we've got rendering completed. Now, while it rendered, I noticed that it never went above 650 meg, so this is a simple job really. The general rule is the 2 GB limit. If it goes over 2 gig, then you need to watch the next video after you've watched this one. If it's less than 2 gig, then this video should be enough for you. So, next step. We need to copy our project to the render space. So, on your desktops, you should have a link called render space. If you double click on that, it'll take you to, well, in my case, I've got lots of previous projects I've been working on. Yours might be blank, it depends what you got on there. And this is the scene I was just rendering from. If I just open up Maya again, you can see at the top here, it's on the desktop. And all I need to do is copy this to the render space. Now it might take a while. This is quite a small project. If you've got a very big project, it could take half an hour or so. I'll just pause the video again while it copies. Right, so that has copied over onto the render space. See there. Notice the file path. If I just bring up this again, the actual path we're looking for is SCM, /SCM-render / and then your user ID. So you'll all have your own space allocated on the render server, and that string, the SCM -render, we'll need that later on when we're submitting the job. So next thing we need to do is step 3. We need to just make sure that our scene is working on the render farm at the moment. So generally the biggest problem with most job submissions is the file paths get messed up, and the render farm starts looking for images which aren't there, or images which are stored on your desktop or your USB drive. So what we need to do is just go back to Maya and set our project to be the one we just copied to the render space. So as I say, it's the SCM render. For me, it's corridor sequence. Select that, and I'm using this scene. And I just need to make sure that all the paths that I've got stored in this scene are pointing somewhere on the render space. Now the easiest way to do that is to use relative file paths. So if you always work at the relative file paths, Maya will always look in the current directory. So rather than looking at C / whatever, my documents, it'll just look for the source images directory in the current folder. So in this case, it'll just be looking in there. So I've got some images there. I've got some image-based lighting stuff as well. So I'll just double check my project. So in the Hypershade, we've got the textures tab. No, I've only got 2 here. This is a ambient occlusion, which we don't need. This one, you can see the file path is, because it begins with source images, it's looking for a directory called source images, so I know that it'll find that one. Now this scene has a couple of mental ray textures as well. See, we've got a problem here. It's looking somewhere on the desktop. So I'm going to change this to source images. Oops. So I can find it. And this one is probably the same. Yep. I need to tell it look in the source images folder. Just check they're both saved. The mental ray textures are I find these a bit flaky, to be honest. Now I've set them, I'm going to save my scene. Make sure they're all set. So the file paths you'll have to change will depend on your scene itself. You might have lots of different things. You might have references, so if you're using models which are in a different scene, make sure that they're the same. Again, just use the reference editor. Again, you'd see my scene has no references, but if you do, they'll be listed here. You can just check the unresolved name, make sure it's pointing somewhere on the render space. You might have cached simulations. Make sure that obviously, again, I don't have any caches in this, but you can go to your cache directory and just find the file path there. Lots of different ways you can store file names. Just make sure they're all pointing at the render space. Once you've done that, we submit the job. So this is the easy bit. Again, on the desktop, where are we? You'll have a shortcut to the Cube GUI. So if I just launch that, I'll just quickly go through the interface. It's fairly straightforward. I mean, there are lots of menus here, but generally you don't need any. You just need submit Maya batch render job. Now there's 2 types. There's mental ray or the Maya software. Again, 99% of the time you'll be looking at mental ray jobs. You may need to use Maya software. Important to note, you can't submit a job that uses both of these things. You've got to do them separately. If you're doing a local render, then you can set your scene up to actually render with 2 different renderers, but we can't do that on the farm. Other things we've got, I suppose here, the obvious thing is just a list of jobs that have gone through. Blue is successful, see 100% completed. We've got red is failed. There'll be some, let's see, you've also got things that have been killed. You've got things that have incomplete. I don't know if we've got any incomplete ones. Oh yeah, some bad logins. stuff that's running. Nothing's running at the moment. You can also filter by your user ID, so just clicking this will just give you my jobs, and this gives everyone's. Other things to look at. You've got another tab here which lists all the workers on the farm. I'll talk about that later on. We've also got some tabs here which show the information about the current job. So say this one, it tells me how long it took. It took about 14 seconds for that frame. We've got some logs, so as Joshua's seen, no errors. That's where it's calculating the final gather, I think. So how to submit a job. Go to submit, my batch render, mental ray job. And it will eventually open this GUI. So these are these fields we need to set. A lot of these fields will correspond to stuff that you recognize, stuff from Maya itself. The general rule is if we leave them blank, which I'll leave these two blank, for example, it will use the data that's set in the scene. If we enter some data, it will use that instead. It'll overwrite the scene's information. So step one, a sensible name. So in this case, just test. The priority, you should set that to 1,000. Now the instances, this is the number of, generally the number of frames we're dealing with. Now we could put in 10,000, say. We won't be able to get 10,000 instances because this is essentially the number of processes that the farm will run, and there's a limit of about 500 maximum. Probably 50 is the minimum, but also it will depend on who else is using the farm at the time. You can put 10,000 in here, and the cube GUI will just change that number when it submits it. It'll give you the maximum number it's allowed. Generally, you want to just put in the number of frames you're rendering. So in my case, I'll put 10 because I'm going to render frames 1 to 10. So the range is just what the frames you want to render. Although this is red, don't change this. This should always say render. That's the process that's actually going to do the rendering. The scene file, this will be where the scene is located. So for me it's corridor, scenes, corridor end. Now this won't work. At the moment I've got the prefix of R on my path. Now the render farm has no idea what R is. That's a Windows thing. That's just a Windows mapping, drive mapping. We need to give it the proper address. So the proper address is, as I said before, SCM-render, / my user ID. There. I think in the labs, if you click the browse button, it will automatically put that in. If not, just type it. Now the other thing we're doing, I'm going to copy the first. This is the name of the. This is the project directory. So I'm just going to copy that because I want to paste that into there. So this proj is where the project is. Now you don't have to put this in, but I find it solves a lot of problems. And much like when you set your project, when you open Maya, you set a project before you open the scene. If you give it the project directory, the farm will essentially set the project before it tries to render it. And so it can find things it's looking for a bit more easily. The render directory, this one, I'm going to just write to images. You can write anywhere on the render space, but it's obviously sensible to write to the image directory. The image name, as I said earlier, you don't need to put this in. It'll pick it up from the scene. Image format, again, don't put it in, it'll pick it up from the scene. The padding, that's just the number of zeros you want before your before the frame number. I usually leave it at 4. Depends how many. Obviously, if you're rendering frame 63,000 to 63,004, we need to increase that a little bit to 6 or something. The naming, again, this is just exactly the same as Maya. How would you want your name formatted? I tend to go for this one, underscore. Some people prefer the dot. Oh no, the dot number extension. It's up to you really. And that's it. Make sure your group is set to Maya. It should be by default. And we'll click submit. So that's it, the job's off. You can see here it's now set to pending, and we can click the refresh button to update the view. So now it's running, and you can see down here these are the number of frames that are rendering. These are the instances, these are sort of the workers that are dealing with it. If I like to look at the graph view. It just shows you the 10 frames and how long they've taken. So if I click refresh, the number will change. 25 seconds, 30, and I'll pause the video now, as exciting as this is. So it's 100 seconds in. You can see 3 frames have completed. The blue means complete, green means running, red means it's failed. So I haven't had any failures yet. I'll just refresh again. There we go, all blue. So it looks like it's complete. 10 out of 10, 100%. At this point we'll check our image directory, see what we've got. We can see here corridor.end, and there are my frames. So I've got more than 10 because I was using render layers. So I've got the teapot layer, I've got a ground shadow, and I've got an ambient occlusion layer as well. And it all seems to have worked. Hopefully there's, yeah, 30 items in there. So, last thing is to copy the files. Now, generally, the render farm doesn't get cleared out very often, but it got cleared out this year, for example, so it does occasionally get cleared out. It is a temporary storage area. So once you've rendered, you need to grab your EXR files or your image files, whatever they are, and copy them off the farm. Get them onto your USB, get them somewhere else, so that they can't be deleted by accident. We will obviously warn you beforehand, but just keep them local. Plus, the local files are a lot quicker when you're doing the comping. If you try to comp your stuff together, reading across the network, everything really grinds to a halt. Right, I think that's it. So there'll be a couple more videos, one showing some more advanced settings and one showing how to troubleshoot your scenes, just common errors and things like that. Right, cheers.